It all started on a school trip. On the bus, there was a nervous boy named Yuyuta who was sweating bullets because he was planning to confess his feelings to his longtime crush. Sitting beside him was his childhood friend, Nagisa, who already knew what he was up to and couldn't help but notice how anxious he looked. The girl Yuyuta wanted to confess to was Yuki, the prettiest girl in their class. But just as Yuyuta was about to finally gather the courage to talk to her, a glowing magic circle suddenly appeared and surrounded the bus. The whole vehicle started shaking like crazy. Everyone panicked and began screaming, thinking it was some kind of earthquake. The teacher with glasses tried to calm everyone down, shouting for the students to grab onto something. Even the bus driver couldn't see the road anymore, just a blinding white light up ahead. Then, in the next instant, the entire bus vanished and reappeared in a strange, ancient world full of giant castles and huge stone knight statues. The bus screeched to a stop, and everything went completely quiet. The students just sat there, shocked and confused, trying to figure out what was going on. Yuyuta looked out the window at the strange scenery and wondered if they were still in Japan, or even on Earth at all. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the bus door. It swung open, and a man in knight armor appeared, barking at everyone to get down. Everyone did as he said without a word. But Yuyuta froze in disbelief when he saw that the entire bus was being held up in the air by a giant robot. Before he could even wrap his head around what was happening, someone else approached and quickly apologized for the rough welcome. This time, it was an older man who introduced himself as Bomber, the manager of the summoning center. He called them Earthlings and explained that they were now in a place called Another World. The students stood in shock, not saying a thing. The teacher with glasses, clearly panicked, finally stepped forward and asked what had just happened to them. Bomber gave a shocking answer. He revealed that they'd been brought to this world to be sold, because only people from Earth had a special energy called Rudia value, which was needed to operate giant robots called mechas. In this world, Fabra, mechas were used for all kinds of work, but almost nobody here had enough Rudia value to use them. That's why Earthlings like Yuyuta and his classmates were so valuable. The teacher was furious, shouting that it was selfish and cruel, but before she could finish, the knight slammed her to the ground and pinned her there. Bomber gave a half-hearted apology for how rough they were being treated and said he was genuinely sorry for them. Before leaving, he told them they would be sold the next day. He also gave them one last, creepy piece of advice, asking them to pray that their Rudia value was high. That night, the students were locked up in a cell like prisoners, forced to sleep packed together in silence, waiting to see what would happen in the morning. The next day, each student had to line up and step in front of a strange machine that measured their Rudia values. The first boy got inside, and when the machine showed a value of 12,000, the man recording the results got excited and announced that he was a Highlander because he'd passed the 10,000 mark. When it was Yuki's turn, she stepped up and completely shattered the record with a Rudia value of 36,000. Everyone was stunned. They all started cheering and clapping for her, since she was the first triple Highlander. Next up was Nagisa. When she stepped into the machine, it announced her Rudia value was 6,500, making her a half-lander. It wasn't anything amazing, but it was still a pretty decent score. Then it was finally Yuyuta's turn. As he walked up to the machine, he realized just how important these numbers were in this world. He felt nervous and curious to see what his value would be. But when the machine showed his result, the guy recording the numbers looked shocked, like he'd just seen a ghost. The machine had revealed that Yuyuta's Rudia value was only 2. Yuyuta couldn't believe it, and neither could the other students. The whole room went silent. Even the bald old man running the machine squinted and put on his glasses to check again. But there was no mistake. Yuyuta's Rudia value really was just 2. After everyone's measurements, the real event began, the auction. The hall was packed with leaders and nobles from different towns, all eager to claim the students for themselves. The auction started with the student who had a Rudia value of 12,000, a Highlander. The auctioneer told the crowd that bidding for the Highlander would start at 10 million gold. Instantly, flashcards went up all over the room, with offers climbing into the millions. After a fierce bidding war, the boy was finally sold to the Valkia Empire for 160 million gold. As the auction went on, Yuyuta couldn't stop thinking about how cruel it was to see his classmates being sold off like property. It broke his heart to realize they were all going to be separated forever. He wondered if he'd ever see Nagisa, his best friend, or Yuki, his longtime crush, ever again. Then, the auction master announced the night's main event, the biggest pearl. The star of the auction was Yuki, with her huge Rudia value of 36,000, making her the only triple Highlander. The crowd went absolutely wild. This time, the bidders didn't hold back, throwing around bids in the billions. Yuhuda was stunned by how differently the crowd treated Yuki. Suddenly, the Elon Musk of the event raised a card showing 12 billion. Nobody else could beat that offer, so Yuki was instantly sold to the man from the Orisha Empire. The crowd started whispering about how the Orisha Empire always seemed to win the highest Rudia values these days. Someone even joked that it was probably because they'd found a new supply of orichalcum, a rare material. Next up was Nagisa, with her Rudia value of 6,500, a half-lander. After some bidding, she was sold to the Amriya Empire for 20 million gold. Before Nagisa left, she turned and gave Yuhuda a sad wave goodbye. Watching the two most important girls in his life get taken away hit Yuhuda hard. Then the auction master cleared his throat and said there was still one very sad rider left to sell. He mentioned that, even though this last person wasn't worth much, he still had to put him up for sale because of the rules. When Yuhuda was brought in, and it was announced he only had a Rudia value of 2, the audience exploded with insults. They shouted that he was completely useless, and some even joked about buying him as a worthless souvenir. Nobody wanted to bid on Yuhuda. The whole crowd laughed and mocked him, leaving Yuhuda standing there, totally humiliated. To make things worse, even Yuhuda's classmates joined in making fun of him. That hurt him more than anything else. Since nobody wanted to bid, the auction master finally said they'd accept even just 1 gold coin for him. Finally, one man stood up and said he'd buy Yuhuda, but he wouldn't waste a single coin. Instead, he offered 2 worthless nuts for him. So, for just 2 nuts, Yuhuda was sold and then locked up like an animal. Late at night, they took him by carriage to a dirty, rundown house. When they got there, the man who bought him slapped Yuhuda on the back of the head and told him this was his new home. Yuhuda was shoved into a tiny room with other slaves. When Yuhuda asked for food, the cruel man yelled that he'd already eaten for the day and would have to stay hungry until tomorrow. Before Yuhuda could say anything else, the man slammed the door shut. Yuhuda sat on the cold floor, feeling more hopeless than ever. Then, a girl named Nanami, dressed in rags, quietly came up to him and asked if he was hungry. Yuhuda looked up and noticed her messy hair and torn clothes. In that moment, it finally hit him that everyone there, including himself, was now a slave. Nanami offered a piece of bread to Yuhuda, but an old man among the slaves reminded her it was her emergency ration and asked if she was really willing to sacrifice it for the new guy. Nanami didn't hesitate. She said she understood the suffering of hunger. Yuhuda was surprised but stayed silent. Eventually, Yuhuda spoke. He thanked her and said her sincerity was all he needed. But Nanami warned him not to be reckless. She told him there was no guarantee they'd have any food the next day. Yuhuda was shocked and asked if she was for real. In that moment, Yuhuda took a second look at Nanami, from her head all the way down to her feet, and realized she was just a teen. That made him wonder what the heck a rugrat like her was even doing in a place like this. Anyway, Yuhuda accepted the bread, but insisted they share it and eat half each. That night, as they lay on the hard, cold ground, Yuhuda struggled to fall asleep. Then he noticed Nanami had curled up beside him, hugging him tightly. He felt a wave of pity. For a little girl like her to endure such unbearable torment, it just wasn't right. The following morning, the wicked merchant burst into the slave quarters. He woke everyone up and announced it was time to get to work. Yuhuda was sent to labor in the fields, even though he hadn't gotten enough sleep the night before. As he worked, he couldn't believe this was his new reality, the life of a slave. After a full day of backbreaking labor, the wicked master gave Yuhuda a small piece of bread and a cup of water. Yuhuda couldn't believe that was all he was getting after working the entire day, but Nanami told him it was better than nothing. While eating, Yuhuda looked at Nanami and became curious. He asked how someone like her had ended up in such a terrible place. Nanami went quiet for a moment and held her bread gently. Then, in a soft voice, she said that her own mother had sold her into slavery. Yuhuda saw the tension in her shoulders and immediately regretted asking. He felt like he'd messed up by asking. But somehow, Nanami gave a small smile. She said that even though her mother sold her, at least her mom got enough money to last a whole month. And because of that, Nanami said she was okay. Later that night, while they were sleeping, Yuhuda noticed Nanami was shaking all over. He began to wonder what was wrong. He recalled what she had told him earlier, that she was okay with being sold by her mother, because at least her family got to fill their stomachs. But when Yuyuta gently pulled back the blanket, he saw the truth. She was not okay. Nanami was crying hard, tears streaming down her face. Right away, Yuyuta hugged her close, trying to comfort her. That night, Nanami cried as much as she needed, and Yuyuta let her rest her head on his chest while she cried quietly. After that night, Yuyuta and Nanami became very close. Nanami started to trust him completely and shared everything with him. One day, while they were working in the field, Nanami excitedly showed Yuyuta a weird, ugly-looking doll she had found near the mansion. She looked so happy that Yuyuta smiled and said she had made a new friend. But that night, while they slept, someone suddenly stormed into the slave room, shouting angrily, demanding to know where something had come from. It was the evil master. He immediately yanked Nanami up by her clothes, called her a brat, and accused her of stealing the doll from the mansion. Yuyuta saw what was happening and instinctively rushed to stop the man from hurting Nanami. He pulled Nanami out of the master's grip and quickly lied, saying that he was the one who had found the doll. Yuyuta claimed he hadn't found it in the mansion, but he had picked it up outside. The man knew Yuyuta was capping, but he didn't care. He punched Yuyuta in the face and beat him up like a common thief. After the man was done taking out his anger, he walked out of the slave room. Nanami immediately rushed to Yuyuta's side and asked if he was okay. Yuyuta forced a smile and assured her that he was fine. Then he apologized for not being able to protect her doll. But Nanami hugged him tightly and told him that he was more important than the doll. Yuyuta blushed a little and thought to himself that Nanami was truly a good girl. The following night, after the slaves had finished a grueling day of labor, the master stormed in and angrily announced they wouldn't be given any food. Nanami immediately felt miserable since she hadn't eaten all day. But while everyone was focused on the lack of food, Yuyuta was more concerned about something else. He noticed that, strangely, the master had forgotten to lock the door that night. This surprised him. However, the old man among the slaves calmly explained that it didn't matter. He said the door could only be opened by someone with a rudia value of 300 or higher. The old man went on to explain that everyone in the room had a rudia value below 100, which was why they were slaves. So it was pretty clear no one would be getting out. The old man said it was a frustrating situation. Yuyuta listened carefully. As he stood there, he subconsciously reached out and touched the door handle. He began to understand why life there was so terrible for everyone. But then, something strange happened. The door suddenly opened. The brightness of the moon spilled into the room. A gust of cool night air swept through, sending a chill across everyone's skin. Every eye turned toward Yuyuta, stunned, silent. Even the old man was frozen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Yuyuta was just as shocked that the door had opened at his touch, but he wasn't about to waste any time. He immediately turned to Nanami and told her he was getting the heck out of there, and asked if she wanted to come with him. Nanami's eyes lit up with excitement, and she gave him a big smile. The old man, still trying to process what had happened, asked in disbelief what Yuyuta's rudia value was. Yuyuta turned back and told him it was 2. Yuyuta and Nanami finally escaped and made it to the big city. Yuyuta immediately suggested they start looking for work and promised Nanami he'd make sure she had enough food to fill her stomach. At the first shop they visited, the owner, after realizing Yuyuta had a rudia value of 2, immediately declined to offer any job and asked them to look elsewhere. They went to another shop, and the same thing happened. Eventually, they looked for work on a ship. A sailor with a cigarette dangling from his mouth asked Yuyuta what his rudia value was. Yuyuta told him it was 2. At first, the man was reluctant to hire him, but after a moment of thought, he agreed. He brought them aboard and told Yuyuta that his job would simply be to make the boat move. As payment, Yuyuta would receive 2 meals a day and 3 gold per trip. With that settled, the sailor led Yuyuta and Nanami to the part of the ship where they would be sleeping. As they entered the room, Yuyuta was surprised to see a bunch of scary-looking guys that reminded him of gorillas. One of them, who was tying a scarf around his head, called them the newcomers and asked for their names. After Yuyuta introduced himself and Nanami, the man asked what Yuyuta's rudia value was. Yuyuta told him it was 2, and the guy replied that it was better than nothing. Right after that, the man got straight to business and showed Yuyuta a giant construction of gears. He explained that their job was to make the gears spin, but added that the work would be way easier if they had someone with a high rudia value. He also warned Yuyuta that spinning the gear was extremely heavy work and urged him to be prepared. With that settled, Yuyuta asked if that small room was where they'd all be sleeping. The man confirmed that it was. Yuyuda then asked if they could go outside at the end of the day's work. But the question irritated the man, who immediately snapped, demanding to know who the heck Yuyuda thought he was. He made it clear that the ship they were on was a slave ship, leaving Yuyuda totally stunned. Before Yuyuda's brain could even process what he had just heard, the ship's anchor was hauled up. A loud clang of metal rang out, signaling that the ship was about to set off, and an announcement echoed through the room, ordering everyone to prepare for immediate departure. The men quickly took their positions at the gear and began spinning it with all their strength. As the gear turned, the propeller slowly began rotating, and the ship started moving forward. Yuyuda watched as the men struggled to push the gear and felt nervous because it looked like real hard work. Nevertheless, Yuyuda was determined to do what he could. But the moment Yuyuda placed his hand on the gear lever, something strange happened. The wheel suddenly took off, spinning so fast that the lever behind him flew from the other man's grip and slammed him in the back. Everyone immediately let go of the gear system and stared in awe as the wheel continued to move at incredible speed. The ship zoomed across the ocean at an amazing speed, and in just a few hours, they had already reached the next dock. The ship's owner, a fatty with sagging cheeks, was very impressed with how things went. He decided to reward everyone with 10 gold coins and the freedom to go outside for the day. Yuyuda was shocked when he heard that everyone could go outside. He asked the same guy with the scarf if people couldn't just run away with such a privilege. The man smiled slightly and then responded sarcastically, asking Yuyuda where they would even run to with such low rudia values. He added that the ship was the best place people like them could get a guaranteed meal. Yuyuda then looked at Nanami and asked if she wanted to stay on the ship or if she'd prefer to escape. Nanami said she wanted to stay with him. Yuyuda asked if she was sure, warning her that if she stayed with him, she might end up starving again. Even so, Nanami insisted that she wanted to be with him. Meanwhile, in a mansion far away in a country called Amuria, a pretty girl asked someone their name. The person turned out to be none other than Nagisa, who quietly introduced herself. The girl smiled and introduced herself as Lainel, the second princess of Amuria, and said she was pleased to meet Nagisa. But then Lainel noticed the sadness on Nagisa's face and immediately guessed she was anxious because she had been sold as a slave shortly after arriving in a strange world. However, Lainel tried to comfort Nagisa by assuring her that she would be treated like royalty. Lainel even explained that riders with high rudia values were treated really well wherever they went, and were even pampered. Hearing this, Nagisa fell silent for a brief moment before asking Lainel if that meant those with low rudia values were treated badly. Before Lainel could respond, Nagisa quietly added that there was someone back at the auction with a very low rudia value, someone she was deeply worried about. Nagisa wept bitterly as she opened up to Lainel, revealing that she had loved Yuyuda for a very long time. Watching Nagisa cry so bitterly, Lainel was overwhelmed by emotion. Without thinking, she pulled Nagisa into a tight hug and promised to do everything she could to find Yuyuda, and maybe, just maybe, her family could even buy him back. Nagisa was surprised when she heard this, and her tear-filled eyes began to dry. Afterward, Lainel took Nagisa to meet her father and introduced her as the Halflander. The king was pleased to meet Nagisa and introduced himself as Magine, the ruler of Amuria. Lainel also introduced her little sister, Himari, the third princess of the country. Then, Lainel led Nagisa to the mecha room, where they stood before a towering mechanical giant. Facing the massive robot, Lainel called out for her eldest sister to come forward and introduce herself. Moments later, the cockpit of the mecha opened, and out stepped Yukiha, who introduced herself as the first princess of Amuria. Following all the introductions, Lainel turned to Nagisa and said it was time she showed her mecha. She led Nagisa in front of a towering giant the size of Optimus Prime and revealed that the mecha's name was Rasbra. Lainel explained that this mecha required a rudia value of at least 5,000 to operate, with a maximum input of 1,000. She said it was equipped with B-rank armor and a rank power output. She proudly added that Rasbra was the strongest mecha in the entire country. Nagisa was in awe. This was her first time seeing a mecha in real life. Lainel then revealed that even with her sister Yukiha's high rudia value, she still couldn't activate Rasbra. That, Lainel explained, was why they specifically needed a rider with a rudia value of at least 5,000. Nagisa then asked if riding the mecha meant she would be used for war. The question caught Lainel off guard, and she didn't know how to respond. Yukiha stepped in. She told Nagisa that while it was true most countries used riders and mechas for warfare, Amuria was different. She assured her that their nation was peaceful and didn't use mechas to wage war. At the same time, back in the port city, Yuyuta and Nanami left the ship and headed for the market. There, Yuyuta spotted some beautiful outfits on display and asked Nanami if she wanted any of them. Nanami was taken aback and instantly became emotional. This was the first time in her life that she got to choose clothes she actually liked. She finally picked an outfit, and the seller said it cost 2 gold and 20 silver. Yuyuta paid right away and asked if that was enough, and the seller confirmed it was. By now, Yuyuta was starting to get the hang of the currency in this strange world. He and Nanami had a total of 17 gold coins and 80 silver, so they decided it'd be best to find a comfy hotel for the night. On the way, Yuyuta noticed Nanami smiling for no apparent reason. He assumed it was because she was extremely happy with her new clothes. Several hours later, they finally found an inn. Yuyuta paid for a single room, which cost 2 gold coins. As soon as they entered the room, Yuyuta saw the bed and was extremely happy. This would be the first time he had slept in a real bed since arriving in this world. But before settling in, he suggested they take a shower together. While washing Yuyuta's back, Nanami suddenly asked in a serious voice if they could stay together forever. Yuyuta stopped to think for a moment. Then he quietly promised that he would always stay with her. He figured that, since Nanami had been sold off by her parents, she probably saw him as an older brother now, someone she could rely on. To her, he was family. Yuyuta silently vowed in his heart to make sure Nanami always had enough to eat, and that one day, she'd get the chance to study and live like a normal youngster. The next morning, Yuyuta was looking all Gucci in the new outfit they'd bought the night before. Nanami, dressed in a sleek little gown, looked like a mini Barbie. She twirled playfully and asked Yuyuta what he thought of her outfit. Yuyuta smiled and said she looked peng. Later that day, Yuyuta and Nanami sat together in a park. Yuyuta had tried searching for a less stressful job but couldn't find any. He explained it was because of his low Rumia value. Regretfully, he told Nanami they'd have to keep living like brokies. Nanami said she was fine with that, as long as she got to be with him. Suddenly, a deep baritone voice asked if they happened to be looking for a job. It turned out to be a middle-aged man in a hat, who said he had work that would pay them 50 gold coins a month. Yuyuta heard 50 gold coins, and his ears twitched like those of a rabbit. But then he imagined the job might be just as stressful as spinning gears back on the ship. So he immediately asked what the job was exactly. The man revealed he had a daughter the same age as Yuyuta, and all he wanted was for Yuyuta to simply talk with her. Yuyuta and Nanami were silent for a moment, expecting more details. But when they realized the man had stopped talking, Yuyuta asked, surprisingly, if that was all. The man said yes. Yuyuta found the job a bit confusing, but he agreed to give it a try. The man was stunned to hear this. He asked if Yuyuta would really do the job for him. Before Yuyuta could reply, the man quickly introduced himself as Belfast and said he looked forward to Yuyuta's cooperation in the future. Not long after, Yuyuta's eyes widened in shock when he finally met Belfast's daughter in her room. He was stunned to see that she had the appearance of a cat rather than a human. Noticing Yuyuta's reaction, Belfast explained that his daughter was suffering from a strange curse known as the half-race phenomenon. As a noble in the country, he had many business enemies, so it was likely that someone with a grudge against his family was responsible. That, he said, was how his beloved daughter ended up this way. Yuyuta calmly approached the girl and introduced himself and Nanami. He then asked for the girl's name. The girl looked surprised to see Yuyuta extending his hand for a handshake. After a moment, she nervously reached out and took it. She said her name was Falma. Yuyuta smiled and asked that, from that moment on, they be friends. He told her she was free to talk to him about anything. From the way Falma looked, Yuyuta guessed she had probably spent most of her time in her room. He figured she rarely spoke to anyone outside her family and didn't have any friends, so it made sense she'd be a bit wary of him. But suddenly, Nanami grabbed Falma by the hand, dragged her along, and said she wanted them to play together. Falma was shocked. She asked Nanami if she really wanted to play with her, then hesitantly asked if Nanami wasn't scared of her. Nanami looked a bit confused and asked Falma why she should be scared of her. Falma fell silent. That kind of response was completely new to her. Belfast watched Falma playing joyfully with Nanami and was speechless. He explained to Yuyuta that he had once brought someone else to meet Falma, but the moment they saw her, they screamed monster and ran away. Belfast said he was truly glad to have finally met Yuyuta and Nanami and was deeply grateful for their kindness. As thanks, he offered to arrange a room for them in his mansion, and told them to feel free to use any of the facilities in the house. And just like that, Yuyuta and Nanami began living in Belfast's mansion. For once, they had good food and a comfy bed to sleep in. They spent most of their time playing with Falma. Nanami and Falma quickly grew close, more like sisters, and spent nearly all their time together. One day, while playing, Yuyuta chased after the girls but eventually got tired. He rested by a shed to catch his breath. But while resting, he accidentally glanced inside and saw a giant mecha, twice the size of a normal one. Falma noticed Yuyuta staring at the mecha and walked over to him. She explained that the mecha was a magical machine her father had brought home a long time ago. After it arrived, a triple Highlander had tried to activate it, but it didn't work, probably because something inside was broken. Yuyuta replied that it didn't matter anyway, since his Rudia score was only 2, and he couldn't do much with that. Falma was shocked. She said she had never even heard of a Rudia score that low before. Yuyuta then asked what her Rudia value was, and Falma casually revealed that hers was just 7,800. While they were talking, Nanami came running up and asked what they were discussing. Now that she had joined them, Falma asked Yuyuta what Nanami's Rudia score was. Yuyuta said he figured Nanami's value must be low, since she hadn't been able to open the door to the slave room back then. However, Nanami pointed out that she had never actually tried to open the door. Yuyuta was stunned. That made him start to wonder if there was a chance Nanami might actually have a high Rudia value. Some time later, Yuyuta finally got the chance to find out Nanami's Rudia value. Mr. Belfast had called in a contractor to measure it, and when the contractor did, he was beyond amazed. It was discovered that Nanami had a Rudia value of 36,000. She was a triple Highlander. Everyone was shocked. No one had expected such an outcome. Belfast told Nanami that with such an incredible Rudia value, she'd be treated better than a princess wherever she went. He even promised to formally introduce her to the royal family if she wanted. But Nanami immediately declined. She said she'd much rather stay with Yuyuta and Falma. Belfast was touched when he heard this, and thought to himself that Nanami was truly a wonderful friend to his daughter. Meanwhile, Yuki finally arrived at the Empire of Orisha. The moment she passed through the city gates, she was saluted by soldiers and received with a welcome fit for royalty. Still, Yuki wasn't happy. She didn't feel great, and she certainly didn't feel she deserved such grand treatment. She was brought before the emperor by the wealthy man who had purchased her, named Kaudo, and was instructed to bow in the presence of the noble ruler. But the emperor immediately stopped her. He told her she was a very special individual, the 5th Triple Highlander. All he asked of her, he said, was to use her power to prove her loyalty to him. After presenting her to the emperor, Kaudo asked Yuki to follow him so he could show her the mecha. He led her to a hangar where a massive, polished machine stood just inside. It was called the Alvara. Kaudo explained that this mecha could only be piloted by someone with a Rudia value of 30,000. Kaudo further explained that the mecha had SS rank armor and SS rank mobility. While Yuki stared at the machine in awe, another guy with long hair joined her, also gazing at it, and commented on how terrifying the mecha looked. The dude asked Yuki if she was the new mecha pilot, and before she could answer, he introduced himself as Yuto and said it was nice to meet her. Yuto told Yuki that he had also been sold into this world about 5 years ago. Like her, he was Japanese, and he added that if there was anything she didn't understand, she was free to ask him. With that, Yuto decided to take his leave. As he walked away, Kaudo informed Yuki that Yuto was a quintuple Highlander. He told her that Yuto was the strongest rider on the continent and held the highest Rudia value, 57,000. Yuki was a bit surprised to hear this and asked if it was really true that Yuto was the most powerful rider on the continent. Kaudo confirmed it again, adding that it was because of Yuto that the Empire of Elysia was considered the strongest in the land. In fact, he said, Yuto held more authority than the emperor himself. In conclusion, Kaudo told Yuki he would assign someone to teach her how to pilot the mecha and expressed hope that she could one day join the country's core. But just as Kaudo was about to leave, Yuki said she had one request. She reminded him about the boy at the auction who had been sold for a few acorns. Kaudo immediately recalled Yuyuta, whom he called the defective one with a Rudia value of 2. Yuki was irritated when she heard the man call Yuyuta defective, and flatly told him that Yuyuta was not like that. Yuki said she was worried about Yuyuta and asked if Kaudo could find out what had happened. Kaudo hesitated, but eventually agreed. He assured her that he would instruct the Elysian Intelligence Division to track Yuyuta down and bring him back. Yuki lit up at the news. She smiled, grateful, and thanked him sincerely. Apparently, Yuki had liked Yuyuta since their first year of school, drawn to how straightforward and gentle he was. She had been planning to muster the courage to tell him how she felt during the school trip. But before she could, it was already too late. Meanwhile, at Belfast's residence, the atmosphere was tense. Belfast had shockingly informed Yuyuta that Nanami's high Rudia value had somehow been leaked to the authorities, and the military had already begun moving to secure her. Yuyuta was stunned. He found it hard to believe and wondered how the military could have found out. Belfast warned him that the military would be arriving at any moment and begged him to take Nanami far away from the mansion. Before Belfast could even finish his sentence, there was a loud, intense banging on the door. It was the Mecha Gun Battalion of the National Military. They announced from outside the house that they had direct orders from military command to detain the child identified as a Triple Highlander. They demanded that the door be opened. But from inside, Belfast shouted back, lying that no such child was in the house. With the tension rapidly escalating, Yuyuta turned to Nanami and told her they had to leave immediately. But just as they were about to move, Falma entered the sitting room and asked if they were leaving. Before Yuyuta could respond, Belfast called for Yuyuta and Nanami's attention. He thanked them for giving his daughter a normal life, and a happy one at that. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. The bullet tore through the wall and struck Belfast in the back. He collapsed to the floor instantly. Everyone was frozen in shock. Falma screamed, "Father," and immediately rushed to his side. In his final moments, Belfast apologized to Falma. He gently patted her head and turned to Yuyuta, begging him to take Falma with him. He said he didn't want her to be lonely anymore. Yuyuta was speechless for a moment, but then nodded in agreement. With tears in his eyes, Belfast drew his last breath and died. Suddenly, the military began pounding on the door with full force, nearly breaking it down. Yuyuta panicked and turned to the girls, telling them they had to leave immediately. They couldn't waste a single second. The three of them managed to get outside the house. They hid behind a wall and saw that the mansion was surrounded by knights and mechas. Nanami noticed something and tugged on Yuyuta's shirt to get his attention. She pointed at the giant mecha inside the shed and asked if they could hide inside it. Yuyuta thought the idea made sense, but the problem was how they were going to get into the mecha. Falma quickly offered a solution. She pointed out that there was a manual entry hatch on the mecha's chest, along with a ladder that led to the cockpit. With that, Yuyuta immediately moved to stand before the towering mecha. He pulled out the ladder and climbed up to the cockpit. The girls followed closely behind. When Yuyuta opened the cockpit, he was stunned by how futuristic it looked inside. They managed to get inside and close the hatch, but suddenly Yuyuta noticed someone entering the shed. It was a knight's mecha. Moments later, it was joined by another. The two mechas noticed the one Yuyuta and the girls were hiding in and began mocking how antique it looked. One of the knight mechas then suggested that, since they were searching for a Triple Highlander, it would be best to destroy the old mecha just in case. The other mecha agreed and pulled out his spear, preparing to strike. Yuyuta and the girls overheard the conversation and began to panic. Then, out of fear, Yuyuta accidentally touched a black-colored sphere, and something remarkable began to happen. A spark of electricity crackled across the mecha's surface, and the machine powered on. At that critical moment, Falma saw a spear flying in their direction, and instinctively shouted for Yuyuta to dodge. Instantly, the mecha dropped to one knee, and the spear struck the wall behind them. The knights were stunned. They couldn't believe that the piece of scrap metal had actually moved, much less dodged an attack. Inside the cockpit, Yuyuta was equally shocked by what was happening. But Falma quickly explained that the mecha seemed to be controlled by his consciousness. She told him that to make it move, he needed to visualize the next action, and then the mecha would follow through. Falma was confident they could defeat the knights' mechas, but Yuyuta pointed out one major problem. He didn't know where the weapons were. Falma fell silent. She had no idea either. However, she quickly added that they didn't need any weapons. All they had to do was punch. Yuyuta hesitated only briefly, then obeyed, delivering a massive punch to the knight mecha in front of them. The enemy mecha staggered backward, and even the pilot inside felt the impact shake his cockpit. Yuyuta was impressed by how powerful their mecha was. Nanami, watching closely, also saw how strong it was, and because of that, she grew confident that they could break through the knight's forces and escape. Yuyuta did just that. He managed to take down both mechas at the same time. Falma was in disbelief, speechless. She couldn't believe that Ludowan's military mechas were no match for the machine's power. With the military mechas defeated, Yuyuta told the girls they had to get out of the warehouse. He began piloting the giant mecha outside the shed. But just as he stepped out, he was confronted by 3 more military mechas. Yuyuta tensed up, realizing it was a 3 versus 1 situation. The military mechas found it odd that their comrades had entered the shed and never came out. They immediately suspected that the strange mecha standing before them was responsible. One of them pointed out that the triple Highlander they had been searching for could be the one piloting it. Not willing to take any chances, they drew their weapons and prepared to attack. One of the mechas swung his giant axe at Yuyuta's mecha, but Yuyuta caught it before it could land and yanked it out of his hand. Another mecha saw this and quickly followed up with a sword attack. But before it could strike, Yuyuta savagely used the first mecha, his partner, as a shield to block the blow. Yuyuta took down 2 of the military mechas, and for the last one, he struck with a sword, stabbing it right in the core. With all 3 military mechas defeated, Yuyuta sighed in relief, grateful he had made it out alive. Falma then asked where they should run to. Yuyuta suggested they leave the country entirely and flee to Arpeka. He explained that it was just a short walk from the mansion to the border, and the streets should be empty at that time of day, making it a good time to escape. The girls agreed. But before they could leave, Yuyuta apologized to Falma for the death of her father. Falma told him it wasn't his fault. She said the blame lay with the country of Ludoon itself. She vowed never to forgive Ludoon for what they did to her father. Nanami jumped in and immediately suggested they get revenge for the death of Belfast. She said that, if for nothing else, they needed to defeat Ludoon. Falma thanked her for bringing up the idea of avenging her father and then agreed they should go to Arpeka. She mentioned that in Arpeka, they could get powerful mechas, even ones that Nanami could pilot. She also pointed out something that needed to be addressed. She said she believed Yuyuta's Rudia value of 2 had to be wrong, since he could move a mecha that even a triple Highlander couldn't budge. Falma added that it was very possible Yuyuta's Rudia value was even more impressive than they had thought. Meanwhile, in a faraway desert, a group of mechas was investigating the presence of some rogue units. Piloting one of the mechas was the 4-eyed teacher, Ruriko. Even though the country that had purchased her had been decent enough to treat her well, they fed her luxurious food, provided a spacious place of residence, and everyone seemed to respect her. As a teacher, that wasn't what she wanted. All she truly wanted was to keep every one of her students safe and find a way to return to Earth. Just then, she was alerted by her squadron that enemy troops had been detected up ahead. According to the scanners, there were a total of 12 enemy units approaching. As the commander of her battalion, Ruriko instructed her units to prepare to attack on her signal. The moment she and her team sighted the enemy, she gave the order. They charged forward, and within just a few minutes, they managed to overwhelm the opposing force. With the attack complete, Ruriko commanded the enemy troops to quietly exit their mechas and surrender. But her eyes widened in horror when she realized that piloting the enemy mechas were none other than her students, 2 girls, Sakura and Taguchi. Watching from her cockpit, Ruriko was shocked. She couldn't understand how the heck her students were even there. One of her team members immediately began interrogating the girls. When they weren't forthcoming, the mecha from Ruriko's team brutally sliced one of their hands. Seeing her students being tortured, Ruriko's fury erupted. Without hesitation, she turned on her own squad, attacking them for the sake of her students and bringing them down one by one. In this strange world where her students had been forced to fight and eliminate each other, Ruriko made a vow that she would never let that happen again. She immediately ordered Sakura and Taguchi to climb into her mecha. The girls were stunned when they realized their teacher was the one piloting it. But there was no time to process their shock. Ruriko urged them to hurry and then told them that they were getting out of there. Just then, one of her team members, barely surviving the earlier attack, staggered to his feet. He pointed a sword at Ruriko and angrily said he would never allow her to leave. Ruriko had no choice. Calmly, she took out a hairband, tied her hair back, and steeled herself. She was more determined than ever to protect her students and to find a way back to Earth with as many of them as she could. Several days later, Yuyuta and the girls finally managed to enter the commercial state of Arpeka. The city center looked rich and thriving, but the outskirts were filled with tenement blocks and slums. To make some quick cash, Falma had decided to sell a piece of jewelry that had belonged to her late father. Even though Yuyuta wasn't fully on board with the idea, the dead broke guy had no choice. However, he warned them to be careful and not to sell it too cheaply. To avoid that, they all agreed on a plan. They would take the jewelry and ask around for prices instead of going to just one trader. The first trader they visited said she was willing to buy the jewelry for 2 million tops. Another trader offered 1 million, while one thief disguised as a trader called the piece a cheap imitation and offered only 100k for it. After meeting with the 3 traders, Yuyuta and the girls took a brief tea break. Then, Yuyuta suggested they sell the gem to the merchant who had offered 2 milli. The girls agreed. They were also of the opinion that it was the best idea. But suddenly, a voice called for their attention, and they turned to see who it was. It turned out to be a dude with spiky hair who firmly warned them not to go back to the merchant who had offered to pay 2 million. He told them they would regret it if they did. The guy walked over to Yuyuta and the girls and introduced himself as Jean. After the brief introduction, Yuyuta asked him to explain what he meant earlier. Jean explained that the merchant was infamous for his fast hands. He said the guy would start off with a very high offer to hook gullible customers, then pull tricks to lower the final price. To help with selling the gem, Jean suggested they hire him. He promised to sell it to another merchant for almost twice what the previous one had offered. All he asked for was a 10% commission on the sale. He assured Yuyuta and the girls that if he couldn't make the sale, he wouldn't take a single coin in return. Yuyuta thought about the deal and realized they had nothing to lose. So he leaned in and whispered into Falma's ear. He told her that he wasn't a natural negotiator and suggested they hire Jean, who seemed more capable of handling the sale. Falma agreed. With that, Jean led them to the first merchant, who offered to pay 10 million. But Jean declined and asked Yuyuta and the girls to follow him, assuring them that he could raise the offer to 12 million or more. He then took them to another merchant, a man with a mustache like Steve Harvey, who immediately offered to pay 15 million on the spot. Jean got furious and insisted the gem was worth more than that. Steve Harvey tensed up just from seeing how angry Jean was, and quickly upped his offer to a whopping 30 million for the gem. Steve paid in cash, with a bag filled with gold coins. Yuyuta and the girls were amazed. Not only had Jean doubled the offer, the guy had literally tripled it like some kind of Gen Z Warren Buffett. Jean, curious, asked what they intended to do with such a crazy amount of money. Yuyuta told him they were planning to buy a mecha. Jean asked what kind they were specifically looking for. Yuyuta replied that they were looking for one that could be operated by someone with a rudia value above 10,000. Jean figured they were aiming to purchase a Highlander mecha, and then dropped a bombshell. Yuyuta's glass of tea slipped from his hand and shattered on the ground when Jean revealed that a Highlander mecha cost 100 million gold coins, more than 3 Cybertrucks. Yuyuta and the girls immediately bowed their heads in despair, realizing they didn't have nearly enough to make the purchase. But then Jean offered a solution. He took them to the Colosseum and explained that there was a way to earn the rest, by participating in the gladiator arena. Yuyuta was initially shocked when he saw the gladiator mechas battling it out in the Colosseum. But then his shock turned to excitement. He asked Jean how he could fight in the Colosseum. Jean told him not to worry and assured him that he'd take care of everything. However, Nanami was scared. She asked Yuyuta if he was going to be okay, seeing how strong the gladiator mechas appeared to be. Jean became curious when he heard this. He turned to Yuyuta and asked if he was the one planning to fight, and what his rudia value was. Yuyuta smiled and said his rudia value was 2, but then, with confidence, asked Jean not to worry. Still, Jean wasn't confident at all and believed that Nanami, who he had found out had a rudia value of over 10,000, should pilot the mecha instead. But Yuyuta told him he didn't have a choice and insisted that he was the only one who could pilot the mecha they had at that moment. Jean was shocked and wondered what kind of mecha would behave like that. Jean joked that Yuyuta shouldn't be able to turn on a magical lamp if his rudia value was really 2. Just then, the announcer at the Colosseum declared the start of the second match of the day. He introduced the first opponent of the fight, a rider who had won multiple matches in a row. The rider's name was Yamakura. Yuyuta heard the name Yamakura and instantly remembered, with certainty, that the guy used to be in his class. Then came the challenger. The announcer introduced him as the old gladiator, Ultadon, who had over 500 wins to his name. The bald-headed old man immediately threatened to show Yamakura that gladiator combat didn't depend solely on rudia grades. Yuyuta knew Yamakura wouldn't respond. Back in class, Yamakura had been a quiet guy who rarely spoke. But to his greatest surprise, Yamakura let out a laugh like a villain on crack before insulting the old baldy, calling him an old coot. And he didn't stop there. Yamakura followed up with a threat of his own, promising to make the old man regret not retiring earlier. The two immediately clashed, each in their individual mechas. The old man tried everything he could to take Yamakura's mecha down for good, but Yamakura had an iron, elongated arm built into his mecha that gave him the upper hand. Altaden was stunned that the arm could withstand the force of his powerful mecha. But the old baldy wasn't about to let the youngin outshine him. He went all out. Still, in the end, Yamakura destroyed his mecha. When the duel ended, it was announced across the Colosseum that Yamakura had emerged victorious. But Yuyuta could tell that Yamakura had changed from the person he used to be back on Earth. He was like a totally different person. The once quiet boy was now an arrogant Chad. Jin moved closer to Yuyuta and asked if he finally understood what he had been trying to say. Jin explained that fighting in the Colosseum meant putting his life on the line. Yuyuta sighed and admitted that he completely understood. But still, he was determined. He said that if that was what it took, then he would definitely beat his opponent. Jin had grown tired of trying to convince him otherwise, so he agreed to let him fight. He then suggested they go find Yuyuta's first opponent and asked what kind of opponent he wanted. Yuyuta said he wanted someone confident, but most importantly, someone who was loaded. Sometime later, they met an ugly dude with a stupid haircut known by everyone as Master Kelvin, or the Red Dragon, who at first immediately declined to fight Yuyuta, calling him a snot-nosed brat. To convince him to fight, Jin offered a 20 million bet on the match, and the greedy Chihuahua immediately accepted. And with that, Yuyuta's first fight as a gladiator was decided. Apparently, the match would be the first one that afternoon. As Yuyuta approached his mecha, the receptionist asked him to wait a minute, and then requested the name of his mecha. Yuyuta was confused and told her that his mecha didn't have a name. The girl said that it would be a problem because she needed the mecha's name for registration. She said Yuyuta had to decide on a name immediately. With no choice, Yuyuta remembered that back on Earth, there used to be an anime he liked a lot. The anime had a white lion as the main character, and the name of this white lion was Arleo. So Yuyuta asked the receptionist to register his mecha with the name Arleo. And so, the announcer began calling out the names and info of the fighters. The first to be announced was Yuyuta and his mecha, introduced as a rookie making his gladiator debut. Yuyuta was about to enter the cockpit of his mecha when Kelvin called out to him and gave him a strict piece of advice. Kelvin told him to do his very best to make it look like he won at the very last minute. He said the reason was that if it looked like Yuyuta won by the skin of his teeth, it would definitely affect the betting for the next match. Yuyuta's opponent, Master Kelvin, was then announced as a mid-rank gladiator with 50 victories to his name. Yuyuta was immediately intimidated when he heard Kelvin's number of wins. Shortly afterward, the battle began. Yuyuta's first attack gave Kelvin an instant scare. He couldn't believe how powerful it was. Compared to the knight's mechas, Yuyuta could tell that Kelvin's attacks were much slower. Not only that, the guy left himself wide open at the top, middle, and even down below. It looked like an easy win. Yuyuta could have counterattacked right then and there, but he remembered Jin's advice, to make the fight look like he was struggling. Still, he had to fight, so he decided to just give Kelvin a light jab to the shoulder. But the moment he did that, Kelvin's mecha partially exploded, and Kelvin nearly saw Heaven's Gate. The crowd went wild, and even Kelvin was in awe of how strong and impressive Yuyuta was with the mecha. Yuyuta, on the other hand, was tense. He had no idea what Jin would say after seeing him hit that hard. A massive cloud of smoke filled the arena, and Kelvin's mecha had suffered a busted piece of armor. But somehow, Kelvin managed to get up and promised that this time, he was bringing all the heat. This gave Yuyuta a bit of relief. At least the fight wasn't over yet. Master Kelvin declared that he was launching his special attack. Yuyuta had no idea what special attack the dude was talking about. But to make the fight drag on a bit, he was prepared to take it head on. With that, Kelvin moved in. The two gladiator mechas clashed and started charging at each other. Kelvin came at Yuyuta with all his might, so Yuyuta decided to apply just a little pressure. That was it. Kelvin's mecha shattered like a second-rate machine made from fake parts. The announcer declared the match over and Yuyuta the winner. Yuyuta was stunned. When he climbed down from the cockpit of his mecha, he could feel the tension in the air. Jin was staring at him with a menacing look, as if Yuyuta had just borrowed money and refused to pay it back. Before Yuyuta could say anything, Jin called him an idiot and scolded him for not dragging the match out and winning by the skin of his teeth. Jin warned him that next time, no one would be willing to fight him. However, while Jin was whining like an old granny, the girls were absolutely thrilled by the massive sum they had won from the match. They excitedly told Yuyuta that they had set aside 100k gold for living expenses and had bet everything they got from selling Falma jewelry on the match. Later that night, at a local pub, the team was supposed to be celebrating Yuyuta's victory, but Yuyuta was worried about his next match and how no one might want to fight him. The girls tried to cheer him up. They said that even though the fight was one-sided, it was still amazing to watch. Still, Yuyuta remained concerned. He asked Jean if he had any plan for how they were going to get more opponents. Jean told him to drink up and said they'd have to come up with something. Suddenly, 3 students from Yuyuta's class entered the bar. Yuyuta immediately recognized the girl with freckles as Yamakura, the guy in the middle as Haranishi, and the other one as Shiba. Yuyuta was excited to finally see some of his classmates. He greeted them with a cheerful, "Long time no see," and asked how they were doing. But Haranishi responded coldly. He said just because they were classmates didn't mean Yuyuta had the right to call them by their names. The dude didn't stop there. He told Yuyuta there was a world of difference between the likes of him and the likes of them. Yuyuta was shocked by his attitude. When he asked Haranishi what the heck he was talking about, Haranishi suddenly shouted, calling him trash and warning him never to say his name again. Haranishi smugly reminded Yuyuta that he was an elite with a Rudia value of 3D300. While Yuyuta was nothing but trash with a score of 2. Yuyuta tried to talk some sense into the guy. He told Haranishi that Rudia value was nothing but just numbers, but Haranishi insisted that in their world, Rudia value was everything, and demanded that Yuyuta show him respect. Nanami got pissed at Haranishi's arrogant attitude and angrily told him not to make fun of Yuyuta. Haranishi was surprised that the little girl was talking to him. He and his crew laughed and mocked Yuyuta, calling him a slave who was now raising brats. Then Haranishi noticed Falma in a hoodie. He said it was rude of her to wear a hoodie in the presence of elites and demanded that she take it off. When Falma hesitated, Haranishi tried to force the hoodie off her head, and that was when they saw her cat face and ears. They immediately got scared and called her a beast. But this pissed Yuyuta off, and he punched Haranishi's stupid face for calling Falma a beast. Just then, Jean banged the table with an alcohol bottle to get everyone's attention. He told Haranishi and his crew that he didn't care what kind of relationship they had with Yuyuta in the past. But since they were now all gladiators, they should settle the issue the gladiator way, right in the Colosseum. Yuyuta was shocked when he heard this and approached Jean, asking him what the heck he was doing. Jean reminded him that he had a secret plan and that this was all part of it. Jean then announced to Haranishi and his gang that the match would be a private melee-only match, a 1 versus 3 type, with a bet of 40 million gold. Haranishi smugly told Jean that he was just throwing his money down the drain. Jean said he was fine with that, then added that if Haranishi didn't want to fight, it would only prove he was really scared of Yuyuta. Haranishi immediately accepted the terms of the fight, confident there was no way he could lose. The following day, the Colosseum was packed with eager fans. The announcer introduced Yuyuta as the new rider who had shown extraordinary strength during his debut a few days ago. Falma noticed Yuyuta's mecha holding a weapon and asked Jean what it was. Jean told her that a 3-on-1 fight would be way too hard to fight bare-fisted, so Yuyuta needed a weapon. Then, Haranishi, Shiba, and Yamakura were announced as the gladiators who had each won 10 matches in a row. With that, the 3-against-1 fight began. The 3 brats were confident that Yuyuta couldn't even beat one of them, let alone all 3. They considered him trash and were hyped up to beat the hell out of him. But to their greatest surprise, Yuyuta's mecha moved with blinding speed and completely demolished Shiba and Yamakura's mechas, leaving only Haranishi's standing. Inside his mecha's cockpit, Haranishi was in shock. He couldn't believe that someone with a Rudia value of 2 could do everything he was witnessing. He felt cheated and started begging Yuyuta to wait. Through the cockpit's comms, he told Yuyuta that if he lost, they would lose everything, and their reign would be over. Yuyuta said he couldn't care less. It was all Haranishi's fault for being an arrogant scumbag. With that, Yuyuta smashed Haranishi's mecha into the ground with such force that it was completely destroyed. The crowd went wild. Yuyuta was declared the winner. But Yuyuta didn't feel happy about the victory. Those guys were his classmates, but it was clear they had changed into something else since arriving in this world. This cruel world, where a person's Rudia score has become the tool to assess someone's worth as a human being. Yuyuta could only wonder what was happening to the rest of his classmates. But at the very least, he promised himself one thing. He would never end up like Haranishi and the rest, those who had sold their souls for the hype of the Rudia value. Meanwhile, in the Orisha kingdom, a mock battle was underway between Yuki in her mecha and two other mechas. Despite the odds, Yuki managed to defeat both opponents. Kaudo and a female officer were quite impressed with her performance. At the end of the practice duel, Yuki asked Kaudo about the favor she had begged him to do for her. Kaudo figured she was referring to the boy with a Rudia grade of 2. He informed her that they had managed to identify the merchant who had purchased Yuyuta. Kaudo explained that they had attempted to negotiate with the merchant to buy Yuyuta back, but that was when they discovered Yuyuta had already escaped. The merchant had tried to hide the truth about Yuyuta's escape and proceed with the negotiation anyway. However, they made sure to punish him with the gift of death for being so scummy. Yuki grew sad when she heard this, but Kaudo reassured her that their intelligence agency was treating the case as a high priority. He was confident they would have good news in the next few days. Meanwhile, in a fancy hotel, Jin told Yuyuta that he wouldn't be able to make money as a gladiator anymore. He explained that after fighting those 3 brats, everyone had seen how incredibly strong Yuyuta was, and no one would want to face him now. Yuyuta then asked what the next plan was. Jin mentioned that since Yuyuta had earned 200 million gold coins from all his fights, the money should be enough to buy the mecha he wanted right away. However, Yuyuta said he would prefer to buy 2 mechas and a ride carrier or transport vehicle. Yuyuta explained that he wanted one mecha for Nanami the Highlander and another for Falma, who had a Rudia value of 7,400. He then asked Jin if the 200 million would be enough for all of that. Jin told him that the prices of everything he intended to purchase were quite high, and 200 million would certainly not be enough. Yuyuta fell into deep thought, then asked Jin if he was absolutely sure there was no chance of getting another fight. Jin paused for a brief moment, thought carefully, and then told Yuyuta there was one person who might be willing to fight him. Yuyuta was excited. He said he didn't mind and asked who the person was, but Jin warned him that he wouldn't recommend it. Jin explained that the person in question had gone unbeaten in 120 fights and was currently the strongest gladiator in the world, with a Ludia score of 23,000. Even so, Yuyuta insisted on taking the fight. He said it would be his final battle as a gladiator. Jin asked him if he was really sure. He warned Yuyuta that he would be facing someone who was practically a triple Highlander. Still, Yuyuta said it didn't matter and confidently assured Jin that he would definitely win. Jin was shocked to hear this and started wondering where the heck Yuyuta was getting all that confidence from. With that settled, Jin asked Yuyuta how much he was willing to bet on the fight. Yuyuta replied, 200 million. Jin was amused and couldn't help but wonder if Yuyuta was actually just stupid. Later that night, Yuyuta slept on the bed with Nanami and Falma by his side. Nanami then suggested that after they were done avenging Falma's father, she'd love for just the 3 of them to live somewhere quiet. Falma agreed with what Nanami said, and Yuyuta didn't have a problem with it either. Nanami got emotional and begged Yuyuta not to get hurt in his upcoming fight. Yuyuta gave a small smile and told her not to worry about it. The following day, Jin took Yuyuta to meet the strongest gladiator. To Yuyuta's surprise, she looked like an average pretty girl, definitely not the muscle-bound, Dwayne Johnson type he had been expecting. When the girl asked about the terms of the fight, she was told that 200 million gold coins were at stake. But she immediately turned it down. She said she wasn't interested in money. After all, she couldn't drink it. Instead, she laid out her own condition, one that was simple but cold. The loser of the battle would belong to the winner. Yuyuta froze in shock when he heard this. Jin immediately shouted, saying she couldn't be serious and that they would never accept such terms. The girl shrugged and said that was fine, it just meant the fight wouldn't happen. But then Yuyuta said he was okay with the condition and accepted it. The girl was impressed. She said Yuyuta wasn't just cute, but also brave, and that she digged guys like him. Jin tried to talk some sense into Yuyuta, warning that if he lost, he would become her slave. He begged Yuyuta not to agree to such a terrible condition. Still, Yuyuta told him not to worry and assured him that he was definitely going to win. Jin stared at Yuyuta with a confused expression, still wondering where he always got that unshakable confidence from. With the duel agreed upon, the girl smiled, called Yuyuta little boy, and then introduced herself as Aluna. She said she couldn't wait to make Yuyuta hers, and that it was a pleasure to meet him. On the day of the most anticipated duel, the whole street near the Colosseum was flooded with people eager to watch the fight. Inside the Colosseum, people were buzzing about the day's special match and how wild it was expected to be. The odds were not even. Aluna was clearly the crowd favorite, and most people were betting on her to win. Yuyuta felt a small pang of sadness just thinking about how no one had bet on him. However, if it was any consolation, Jin assured him that he had staked his money on him. Falma and Nanami also told him they had placed their bets on him to win. Hours later, the announcer declared it was time for the hottest match of the year. It was announced that the strongest gladiator, Aluna, had returned to the Colosseum. It was said that Aluna was so strong that, for the longest time, she had no worthy opponent. She was the undisputed queen of gladiators. On the other hand, Yuyuta was referred to as the novice gladiator who had managed to win a series of melee matches. Before the battle started, Aluna spoke through the cockpit comm. She called Yuyuta a small boy and asked if he was ready. Yuyuta was pissed and warned her not to call him that again. Just then, metal clanged, signaling the start of the battle. Both mechas immediately charged at each other. Yuyuta froze in fear when he witnessed the speed at which Aluna's mecha closed in. They clashed weapons multiple times, but it was clear to everyone that Yuyuta was struggling to keep up. The battle was fierce, but Yuyuta managed to land a strike on Aluna's mecha. Aluna was impressed. She commended him for being the first person to ever deal any damage to her mecha. But Yuyuta was confident. He assured her that he would not only be the first to damage her mecha, but also the first to defeat her. Aluna found his words interesting and told him to try if he could. She said she was just warming up. And before Yuyuta knew what was happening, something strange occurred. Aluna's mecha disappeared. Yuyuta was shocked. He had never seen anything like it before. Even Jin, watching from the crowd, looked on in disbelief. Before Yuyuta could wrap his head around what was happening, Aluna reappeared and slashed his mecha's hand with her weapon, causing it to fall instantly. Will Yuyuta survive this duel or end up being a slave to Aluna? Comment strongest mecha if you're eager to find out in our part 2. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching.